Hashtag the Alpha King who lost his mate, and found the son she left behind 6 years ago. Evelyn Carter stood before the royal court with tears in her eyes and a silver mate pendant in her trembling hands. The moon goddess had chosen her for Alexander, the Alpha King, yet the man she loved looked at her as though she were a threat to everything he had sworn to protect. He rejected her before the entire court. Evelyn did not beg. She did not argue. She simply placed the silver pendant on the cold marble floor and whispered that if this was truly what her king wanted, she would leave with her dignity. Alexander watched her walk away, convinced that he had made the only decision a king could make. For 6 years, he carried that memory as proof that he had protected his crown. He never knew that Evelyn had been carrying a secret of her own. He never knew that she had been pregnant with his child. He never knew that she had tried to return. And he certainly never knew that the people he trusted most had helped keep the truth from him. Now, beneath the cold chandeliers of the palace, Alexander was holding a letter written in Evelyn's unmistakable handwriting. The first sentence was enough to make the strongest man in the kingdom forget how to breathe. If you are reading this, Alexander, I am already gone. Alexander read the sentence again. Then once more. His fingers tightened around the paper as memories he had spent 6 years burying began to rise. Evelyn Carter had been gone for 6 years. 6 years since she had stood before his throne. 6 years since he had rejected the woman the moon goddess had chosen as his mate. 6 years since he had watched her remove the silver pendant from her neck and place it on the marble floor. He remembered her face more clearly than he wanted to admit. She had looked hurt, but she had not looked defeated. She had simply looked at him as though she were trying to understand how the man she loved could have become someone she no longer recognized. If this is what you truly want, my king, she had whispered, then I will leave with my dignity. He had wanted to call her back. He had remembered wanting to rise from the throne and tell her to wait. But pride had held him there. Duty had held him there. And the advice of the people around him had convinced him that letting her go was the safest choice for the kingdom. Now the letter in his hands was telling him that every certainty he had carried for 6 years had been built on something incomplete. His eyes moved down the page. My leaving was never because I stopped loving you. Alexander stopped reading. The palace suddenly seemed enormous and empty. He had spent years believing Evelyn had betrayed him. He had believed her silence meant guilt. He had convinced himself that her behavior before the rejection ceremony had confirmed everything his advisors had warned him about. Yet now her own handwriting told him something else. She had not left because she stopped loving him. She had left because he had already decided there was no place for her beside him. Then he saw a name. Lucas. Alexander whispered it aloud. He had never heard the name in connection with Evelyn. He read the next lines, and the world seemed to shift beneath him. There is a little boy who deserves to know the truth about his father. Alexander's breathing became shallow. A little boy. His eyes moved lower. His name is Lucas Carter. He stared at the page. Then came the sentence that changed everything. He is your son. For several seconds, Alexander could not move. Somewhere beyond the palace walls lived a 6-year-old boy carrying his blood and the royal mark. A child who should have known his father from the beginning. A child Alexander had never even known existed. Alexander lowered the letter. His first instinct was not anger. It was disbelief. How could he have missed something so important? How could a child connected to the royal bloodline have remained hidden for 6 years? And why had Evelyn waited until after her death to tell him? The questions came faster than he could answer them. Then he remembered something he had dismissed years ago. Evelyn had once placed a hand against her stomach during the days before the rejection ceremony. He had noticed it. He had wondered about it. But he had never asked. He had been too focused on the accusations surrounding her. Too convinced that his advisors knew what they were talking about. Too proud to admit that perhaps he did not understand the woman standing before him. Alexander closed his eyes. He had called that strength. Now it looked like fear. Fear of trusting someone when the crown demanded certainty. Fear of being wrong. Fear of allowing love to influence a decision he believed belonged only to the king. Yet the letter made one thing painfully clear. Evelyn had not been given the chance to explain herself. And Alexander had never bothered to ask why. He turned the page. There was more. Evelyn explained that on the night of the rejection ceremony, she had intended to tell Alexander about Lucas. But before she could speak, she heard something that changed her understanding of the people surrounding the throne. She had realized that someone inside the palace was manipulating information. Someone she believed had access to decisions involving Alexander and the succession. She had become afraid that if she remained near the crown, her unborn child would become part of a political struggle before he had even taken his first breath. So she left. Not because she hated Alexander. Not because she wanted revenge. She left because she believed the only way to protect her child was to disappear from the world that had already decided who she was. Alexander stood alone in the palace hall long after he finished reading. Then he made a decision. He would find Lucas. Not because the boy was an heir. Not because the kingdom needed a successor. He would find him because Lucas was his son. He ordered preparations for a journey and left the palace before dawn. During the journey, Alexander barely spoke. The landscape changed from the stone roads surrounding the capital to quiet fields and small villages. He looked through the carriage window and wondered what Evelyn's life had become after she left him. Had she hated him? Had she regretted loving him? Had she ever waited for him to come looking? He did not know. That ignorance had become the most painful thing of all. When Alexander finally reached Silver Creek, he found a small home surrounded by a modest garden. There was nothing royal about it. No guards stood outside. No servants waited at the door. No banners carried his family crest. Yet something about the place made him stop. It felt peaceful. It felt lived in. It felt like a life built without him. Then the door opened, and Alexander saw a boy holding an old blue storybook. Lucas looked at him with cautious curiosity. He was 6 years old, quiet, observant, and gentle. There was something familiar in his eyes that Alexander could not explain. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander had imagined this meeting in 100 different ways during the journey. None of those imagined moments had prepared him for the reality of standing in front of the child he had never known. Lucas looked at him carefully. "Who are you?" Alexander almost answered as king. Instead, he stopped himself. "My name is Alexander." Lucas nodded slowly. "Are you here because of Mom?" Alexander looked toward the photograph on the wooden table. Evelyn was smiling beside Lucas, peaceful and warm. "Yes," he said. "I am here because of your mother." Lucas studied him. "Did you know her?" Alexander swallowed. "Yes." The boy looked down at the book in his hands. "She said you were important." Alexander almost smiled, but sadness reached him first. "She was important to me too." Lucas was silent. Then he reached toward a small wooden cabinet and brought out an envelope. "Mom told me to give you this if you ever came looking for me." Alexander stared at the handwriting on the envelope. His name was written across the front. Alexander asked if he could come inside. Lucas stepped aside. The house was small, warm, and filled with reminders of Evelyn. Books rested beside the window. A simple kitchen table stood near the back wall. Family photographs filled the shelves. Alexander saw evidence of a life he had never been allowed to witness. He sat across from Lucas and opened the envelope carefully. Evelyn's letter began with a request. If Alexander had found Lucas, she wanted him to understand that the boy was not a secret that needed to be hidden any longer. She did not want Lucas to feel ashamed of where he came from. She did not want Him to believe that his father had abandoned him because he was unwanted. She wanted him to know that she had loved him every day. Alexander's eyes filled with tears as he continued. Evelyn explained that she had never told Alexander about Lucas because she did not want a child to become the reason he returned. If Alexander ever came back, she wanted him to come because he freely chose them. Then Alexander reached the line that broke through every remaining defense he had built around himself. Evelyn had written that Lucas carried the royal mark and that one day people might expect him to become an heir. But before Lucas became an heir, she wanted him to become a boy who knew he was loved. Alexander looked at the child sitting across from him. Suddenly, the crown seemed irrelevant. He had arrived expecting to find a hidden heir. Instead, he had found a little boy who needed a father. Alexander folded the letter carefully. "Lucas," he said softly, "I cannot change the years I missed." The boy remained quiet. "But if you will let me, I would like to be here now." Lucas studied his face for a long moment. Then came the question Alexander had feared most. "Are you my father?" Alexander's voice trembled. "Yes." 6 years of silence ended with one word. Lucas did not immediately run toward him. He did not suddenly forget the years that had passed. He simply looked at Alexander, trying to understand whether this stranger truly belonged in his life. "Why did you come now?" he asked. Alexander lowered himself into the chair so they were closer to the same level. "Because your mother left me the truth." Lucas looked toward the letter. "Did she say something bad about you?" Alexander shook his head. "No. She told me something harder. She told me the truth." Lucas remained quiet. Alexander knew then that being Alpha King did not give him the right to demand trust from a child. He had spent 6 years expecting Evelyn to trust him because of the bond between them. Now he understood that trust had to be earned. Even from his own son. Lucas eventually showed Alexander more of the house. He pointed out the books Evelyn loved. He showed him the garden. He told him about Sunday mornings when his mother made pancakes and always made too many. Alexander listened to every detail. The smallest stories hurt more than the great revelations because they showed him exactly what he had missed. He had missed birthdays. He had missed first lessons. He had missed ordinary mornings. He had missed the simple moments that make a childhood. Yet Lucas did not speak with bitterness. He spoke with the quiet honesty Evelyn had apparently taught him. Alexander realized that the boy was not asking him to repair 6 years in a single day. He was asking whether Alexander intended to stay. Before leaving Silver Creek, Alexander discovered another envelope. Evelyn had written several letters and instructed Lucas to give them to his father only when the time was right. One was marked, "For the day he finally asks why." Alexander opened it carefully. The letter explained that Evelyn's departure had not been caused only by the rejection. Before the ceremony, she had discovered something about the people surrounding the throne. She had realized that information was being manipulated. She feared that if she remained, Lucas would be placed inside a political struggle before he was old enough to understand it. She had chosen distance because she believed it was safer. Alexander read the letter twice. Then he saw the name that had appeared again and again in the records surrounding the palace. Marcus Hale. For 6 years, Marcus had been Alexander's closest advisor. He had been the man Alexander trusted when every other voice seemed uncertain. He had helped interpret reports, advised the council, and guided the king through decisions involving the succession. Yet Evelyn's letter suggested that Marcus had known far more than Alexander had realized. Alexander looked at Lucas. "We need to return to the palace." Lucas hesitated. "Why?" Alexander answered honestly. "Because your mother left something unfinished." Lucas thought about it. Then he nodded. "I want to go with you." Alexander agreed. During the journey back to the capital, Lucas sat quietly beside Alexander. The boy looked through the carriage window at the fields passing outside. Alexander watched him for a moment. There was something of Evelyn in the way Lucas observed the world. It was not royal confidence. It was patience. It was the quiet strength of someone who had learned to listen before speaking. Alexander finally asked, "What was your mother like when she was happy?" Lucas smiled. "She liked mornings. She made pancakes on Sundays." Alexander almost laughed. "Pancakes?" Lucas nodded. "She always made too many." For the first time in days, Alexander smiled without feeling guilty for it. For a few moments, he could imagine a life that might have existed if he had chosen differently. When the palace appeared beyond the hills, Alexander looked at it differently. 6 years earlier, he had believed the palace represented everything he had to protect. Now he wondered whether he had confused protecting the kingdom with protecting the people he loved. When they entered the palace, the attendants immediately noticed Lucas. Whispers traveled through the corridors. Alexander ignored them. He took Lucas to a private room overlooking the gardens. "You can stay here tonight," he told him. "Tomorrow, I will introduce you to the royal council." Lucas looked uncertain. "Will they like me?" Alexander crouched beside him. "Some may not understand at first. But you do not need to prove that you belong here." Lucas looked into his eyes. "Because I am your son." Alexander nodded. "Because you are my son." That night, Alexander entered the royal archives and requested every document connected to Evelyn Carter from 6 years earlier. Reports were placed on the table. Statements. Council notes. Messenger records. Official correspondence. And finally, the report signed by Marcus Hale. Alexander read it slowly. The document claimed Evelyn had secretly contacted a rival territory before the rejection ceremony. But the dates did not match. The supposed meeting occurred before the messenger was even recorded as leaving the capital. Alexander checked another document. Then another. Each discrepancy made his stomach tighten. The evidence he had trusted for 6 years had never been as solid as he believed. He had simply never questioned it because Marcus had told him what it meant. A quiet knock came at the door. Marcus Hale entered. He looked at Lucas and then at Alexander. "Your Majesty, I heard you returned." Alexander closed the document. "I did." Marcus looked toward the boy. "And who is the child?" Alexander answered without hesitation. "My son." For the briefest moment, Marcus's expression changed. Recognition appeared first. Then concern. Then he recovered his composure. Alexander noticed every part of it. "You may leave," he said. Marcus bowed and walked away. Alexander waited until the door closed. Then he requested the original records rather than summaries. The more he examined them, the clearer the pattern became. Someone had changed statements. Someone had altered dates. Someone had hidden information. And Marcus's name appeared close to too many of those decisions. Then the archivist brought Alexander a sealed report from the palace healer. It had been written the morning after the rejection ceremony. Evelyn had visited the healer privately. She had been exhausted and deeply distressed, and she had asked whether a pregnancy could be confirmed that early. Alexander stared at the page. He had never seen it. "Why was this sealed?" he asked. The archivist answered that Lord Marcus Hale had requested it. Alexander closed his eyes. Evelyn had known she was carrying his child. She had gone to the healer after he rejected her. She had been carrying Lucas while Alexander sat on his throne believing the story told to him by others. Alexander ordered the healer brought to the palace. Her name was Margaret Ellis. She had served the royal family for more than 20 years. When she entered the room, she looked at Alexander with sadness rather than surprise. "You finally found out," she said. Alexander asked what she knew. Margaret confirmed that Evelyn had come to her after the rejection. She had been carrying Lucas. Margaret had written a private report confirming the pregnancy, but Marcus had ordered her to seal it. He told her that the king needed peace and that Evelyn had already chosen to leave. Alexander looked away. She did not choose to leave, he said quietly. I gave her no reason to stay. Margaret nodded. She loved you very much. Alexander closed his eyes. Those words were almost harder to hear than the truth itself. Alexander asked whether Evelyn had ever spoken about him. Margaret said she had asked about him many times, but she had never asked the healer to contact him. When Alexander asked why, Margaret answered that Evelyn believed he had made his choice. Then Margaret gave Alexander one final message Evelyn had left behind. If he ever comes looking for the truth, tell him I never needed a king. I only needed the man I loved to believe me. Alexander lowered his head. For 6 years, he had believed Evelyn wanted a crown beside him. Now he understood that she had wanted something much simpler. Trust. The word stayed with him. Alexander returned to the archives and requested every document connected to Marcus. One letter stood out. It had been written 3 days after Evelyn left the palace. Marcus had written that the matter had been resolved and that the queen would not return. But Evelyn had never been queen. She had not even been formally recognized as Alexander's mate. Why had Marcus described her that way? Alexander continued reading. The next sentence mentioned the child. Marcus knew about Lucas almost immediately. He had written that the child must remain unknown until the succession was secure. Alexander sat back. This was no longer a misunderstanding. Marcus had made decisions about Alexander's family without telling the king. He had believed he was protecting the crown, but he had taken away Alexander's ability to make his own choice. Lucas entered the room quietly. Can I sit with you? Alexander nodded. The boy climbed into the chair opposite him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucas asked, Are you angry with Mom? Alexander shook his head. No, Lucas asked another question. Are you angry with yourself? Alexander hesitated. Yes. Lucas nodded. Mom used to say being sorry is easy. Changing is harder. Alexander smiled sadly. She was right. Lucas looked toward the documents. What are you going to do? Alexander gathered the papers. I am going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Lucas asked if that would bring his mother back. Alexander looked toward her. Photograph. No. But it can make sure no one remembers her as someone she was not. Lucas lowered his eyes. Alexander added quietly, she deserved to be believed. That evening, Alexander called an emergency meeting of the Royal Council. Every senior advisor was summoned, including Marcus Heir. The chamber filled beneath the high ceiling. Quiet voices moved through the room until Alexander entered with Lucas beside him. The room fell silent. Alexander placed Evelyn's letters and the sealed records on the table. 6 years ago, this council accepted a story about my mate without giving her a fair chance to speak, he said. I accepted it too. No one interrupted. Alexander continued. Today, I have learned that the story was incomplete. Evelyn Carter was innocent of the accusations made against her. And the kingdom is going to learn why. Marcus finally spoke. He claimed that 6 years earlier he had received information suggesting Evelyn was connected to a group seeking influence over the succession. He said he believed that if Evelyn became Alexander's mate, the royal family could become divided. Alexander asked where the information had come from. Marcus hesitated. Then he admitted that it had come from Evelyn herself. He explained that someone had intercepted a private message she had written before the rejection ceremony. Marcus presented a copy. Alexander read it slowly. The message said that if Alexander did not believe Evelyn, she would take their child somewhere safe. She did not want Lucas to grow up believing his mother was unwanted. Alexander looked at Marcus. You knew this was about our child. Marcus nodded. He claimed he thought he was preventing a larger crisis. Alexander's voice remained calm. You turned a mother's fear into evidence against her. The council remained silent. Marcus tried to explain that he had believed he was protecting the crown. Alexander did not shout. He did not threaten him. He simply said, "You were not protecting my kingdom. You were protecting your idea of what my kingdom should be." The sentence settled over the chamber. Alexander ordered a complete review of every record involving Evelyn. No accusation would remain in the royal archives without original evidence. No advisor would make decisions about his family without his knowledge. And most importantly, Evelyn's name would no longer be associated with a story that had never been properly proven. Lucas stood quietly beside his father throughout the meeting. For the first time, he was not being hidden. He was being acknowledged. Later that night, Alexander entered the small room prepared for Lucas. The boy was sitting beside the window, holding Evelyn's photograph. "She looks happy here," Lucas said. Alexander sat beside him. "She does." Lucas looked at him. "Do you remember her like this?" Alexander smiled sadly. "I remember many versions of her. I just wish I had taken the time to know them all." Lucas leaned back and asked if Alexander could tell him about her. Alexander nodded. "I will." He reached for the photograph. But something slipped from behind the frame and landed softly on the floor. It was another folded page. Alexander picked it up. The outside contained only 4 words, "For when he comes home." Alexander stared at the message. He had spent the entire day searching for the truth about the past. Now Evelyn had left him one more piece of that truth. And this time, the letter was not about the kingdom. It was about Alexander himself. He opened the page. Evelyn wrote that if he was reading it, he had somehow found his way back to the life they once might have shared. She did not know whether he had come because he finally learned the truth, because he missed her, or because he discovered their son. Whatever brought him back, she did not want him to return out of guilt. Alexander continued reading. Evelyn asked him to tell Lucas that she had loved him every day. She did not want her son to believe he had been the reason his father stayed away. Lucas was the reason she kept going. She admitted that there had been mornings when she missed Alexander so much that she almost returned. Then she remembered the look in his eyes when he rejected her, and she understood that love could not survive without trust. Alexander closed his eyes. He remembered that night. He remembered his own words. He remembered how easy it had been to believe that certainty was strength. Now he understood that certainty without compassion could destroy the very thing a person was trying to protect. Evelyn's letter told him that she had forgiven him long ago. Not because what happened was unimportant, but because she did not want Lucas to grow up carrying her sadness. Alexander looked at his son. Lucas asked whether she truly forgave him. Alexander said that she did. Lucas smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should forgive yourself too." Alexander felt his eyes grow warm. A 6-year-old boy should not have to teach a king how to carry regret, but Lucas had said exactly what Alexander needed to hear. The letter continued with one final request. If Alexander ever returned, he should not spend his life trying to prove that he loved Evelyn. He should love their son instead. He should be patient when Lucas was afraid, listen when he was angry, celebrate when he succeeded, and tell him the truth about his mother. Alexander could not continue reading for a moment. He folded the letter against his chest. Lucas reached for his hand. "She believed you could become better." Alexander looked at him. "I do not know if I deserve that belief." Lucas squeezed his hand gently. "Then become better." A quiet smile touched Alexander's face. "You sound like your mother." Lucas smiled back. For the first time, the room did not feel haunted by everything they had lost. It felt like the beginning of something new. Alexander had spent 6 years believing that his greatest failure was losing Evelyn. Now he understood that his greater responsibility was making sure he did not lose the chance to become a father to Lucas. That night, Alexander walked through the palace alone. He stopped outside the old throne room where Evelyn had once stood before him. The memory remained. He could still imagine the cold marble beneath her feet. He could still remember the silver pendant touching the floor. He could still hear her voice telling him she would leave with her dignity. But the memory no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a lesson. He had been given another chance, not to rewrite the past, because no one could do that, but to change what came after it. The next morning, Alexander returned to the council chamber. He stood before the kingdom and spoke Evelyn's name without shame. He acknowledged that she had been accused without receiving a fair chance to defend herself. He admitted that he had accepted the accusations because he trusted the wrong people and failed to ask the questions he should have asked. He did not attempt to make himself look innocent. He did not blame Marcus for every decision. He told the truth about his own part in what happened. Evelyn had deserved to be believed while she was alive. Alexander could not give her that anymore. But he could make sure the kingdom remembered her honestly. The royal records were corrected. Evelyn's name was restored. The accusations were removed where the evidence did not support them. Lucas was officially recognized as Alexander's son and rightful heir, but Alexander made certain that the title did not become the center of the boy's childhood. Lucas was not a political object. He was a child. He needed a father before he needed a crown. And Alexander finally understood that being a good king did not mean sacrificing every human relationship for the sake of duty. Sometimes duty meant protecting the people who trusted you enough to need you. That evening, Alexander and Lucas returned to the little cottage in Silver Creek. Marcus had brought one final sealed document from Evelyn. It carried the royal crest, but the handwriting was hers. Alexander opened it. Inside was a final request. If Alexander ever returned, Evelyn wanted him to choose for himself. Marcus explained that she wanted Alexander to decide whether he would return to the crown as the same man or return to his son as his father. Alexander looked at Lucas. The boy held the old blue storybook against his chest. Evelyn had not demanded forgiveness. She had not demanded that Alexander return to her memory and spend the rest of his life in regret. She had given him freedom. Alexander looked around the cottage. He saw the small table where Lucas had eaten countless meals. He saw the books Evelyn had read. He saw the garden she had cared for. This was not a place built from bitterness. It was a life built from quiet love. Lucas asked if they could stay there that night. Alexander said yes. The council could wait. The kingdom could wait. For once, Alexander allowed something personal to come before the expectations of the throne. That evening, he tried to make pancakes. The first one came out uneven. Lucas laughed and told him his mother made them better. Alexander laughed too. The second pancake was better. By the third, Lucas was smiling. For a few minutes, there was no crown, no council, no succession, and no old accusation. There was only a father learning how to make breakfast for his son. Later, after Lucas fell asleep, Alexander sat alone in the kitchen and read Evelyn's final letter. She told him that she had never needed him to rescue her. She had needed him to believe her. If he could not do that then, she hoped he would learn to do it for their son. Then she wrote one final thought. If the kingdom ever asked him to choose between being a king and being a father, he should remember that Lucas had not chosen the crown. Lucas had chosen him. Alexander looked toward the bedroom door. His son was sleeping peacefully. The choice was no longer difficult. At sunrise, Alexander prepared to return to the palace. He would tell the kingdom the truth, not to erase his regret and not to win forgiveness. He would do it because Evelyn deserved to be believed while she was alive, and because Lucas deserved to grow up knowing that his mother had never been the woman the kingdom once accused her of being. Before folding the letter, Alexander noticed one final sentence beneath Evelyn's signature. "If you truly loved me, then let the truth become the legacy you leave our son." Alexander held the page for a long moment. 6 years earlier, he had believed his greatest duty was protecting a kingdom. Now he understood that his greatest duty was protecting the truth his son would inherit. 1 year passed. The palace had not changed much from the outside. The towers remained. The royal banners still hung above the council chamber. The marble halls still echoed with the footsteps of advisors and guards. But Alexander had changed. He no longer hurried past the gardens without looking. He no longer allowed council meetings to consume every evening. And every Sunday morning, he made pancakes with Lucas, even though Lucas still insisted that his mother's recipe was better. The royal court had learned to accept Lucas without turning his childhood into a ceremony. He studied with tutors, played in the gardens, and spent long afternoons reading the stories Evelyn had once loved. His name was entered into the royal archives as the rightful heir, but Alexander never allowed the title to become more important than the child himself. One evening, Lucas stood before Evelyn's portrait. She was smiling in the painting, peaceful and warm. "Father," he called. Alexander walked toward him. Lucas asked whether Mom would like the palace now. Alexander smiled. "I think she would like the garden." Lucas laughed. They stood together beneath the warm light. Then Lucas asked the question he had carried for a long time. "Did you really love her?" Alexander looked at Evelyn's portrait. He did not answer quickly. Some questions deserved more than an easy response. Finally, he said, "Yes. I loved her. I just did not understand how to love her the way she needed." Lucas nodded. "She said you could learn." Alexander smiled. "She believed that until the end." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out the old silver mate pendant. Alexander recognized it immediately. "She left this for you," Lucas said. "I think she wanted you to have it." Alexander accepted the pendant carefully. For years, he had believed that silver symbol represented everything he had lost. Now it represented something different. It reminded him of Evelyn's courage. It reminded him of the child she protected. It reminded him that love could be broken by pride, but truth could still survive. Alexander closed his hand around the pendant. Lucas asked what his mother had given him that was more important than the pendant. Alexander looked at his son. "A second chance to become the man she believed I could be." Lucas smiled. "Are you?" Alexander answered honestly. "I am still learning." They walked together toward the garden as evening settled over the palace grounds. Behind them, Evelyn's portrait remained beneath the warm light of the hall. Her name was no longer whispered as a forgotten scandal. It had been restored to the royal archives. A memorial garden had been created beside the old moon garden where she had once waited for Alexander. Every spring, white flowers filled the paths. Every year, Lucas planted one new rose there. And every time he did, Alexander remembered the woman who had given him the hardest lesson of his life. Strength was not always certainty. A crown could command obedience, but it could not command love. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. One evening, Lucas stood beside Alexander beneath the flowering tree. He looked toward the sky and asked, "Do you think Mom can see us?" Alexander paused. He did not pretend to know something he could not know. "I do not know," he said. "But I hope she can." Lucas took his hand. Alexander held it gently. They stood beneath the same branches where Evelyn had once waited, but this time, no one was waiting alone. Alexander had lost the woman he loved, but he had found the son she left behind. And in choosing to raise him with patience, honesty, and love, the Alpha King finally understood what Evelyn had been trying to teach him all along. Some people leave us too soon. But the love they leave behind can still change the person we become.